There is a particular kind of silence that follows unanswered questions. Not closure, not resolution, just the quiet sense that something important slipped past us while we were looking in the wrong direction. In January 2013, a young woman vanished inside a building that had no shortage of witnesses, cameras, or history. 19 days later, she was found in a place no one had thought to look, despite having looked almost everywhere else. Her name was Elisa Lam. If you've heard her story before, you probably remember the elevator, a grainy surveillance clip, a young woman pressing buttons, stepping forward and back, her hands moving strangely, as if she's negotiating with something we can't see. The video has by now been replayed millions of times. Slowed down, zoomed in, analyzed frame by frame like a modern oracle. People ask what she was running from, who she was talking to, why the doors wouldn't close. But if we begin with the elevator, we're already missing something crucial, because the story of Elisa Lam does not begin with mystery. It begins with a person who was very real, very articulate, very alive, and very tired. Elisa Lam was 21 years old. She was from Vancouver, British Columbia. She was a student, a writer, a reader, a compulsive curator of thoughts. Online, she wrote openly about her struggles with bipolar disorder and depression, often with humor, often with piercing self-awareness. Her blog wasn't cryptic. It wasn't a prophecy. It was mundane in the most human way possible. She wrote about insomnia, about missing her classes, about scrolling endlessly through Tumblr and feeling directionless, about lying in bed watching cooking shows while waiting for the heaviness to lift. In one post, she wrote, "It is a weariness that keeps me at a standstill." That sentence matters, because later, when the world tried to explain her death, it would either erase her mental illness entirely or reduce her to nothing but it. Both are mistakes. So let's travel back. In January 2013, Elisa decided to travel alone along the California coast. She arrived in Los Angeles on January 26th. She checked into the Cecil Hotel downtown. The Cecil had a reputation long before she arrived. Built in the 1920s, it had once been grand and powerful. But by 2013, it sat at the edge of Skid Row, surrounded by poverty, addiction, and violence. Police officers were dispatched there constantly. Thousands of emergency calls over the years. Serial killers had stayed at Cecil. People had died here. But none of that was visible on the booking website. Elisa initially shared a room with other guests. They complained about her behavior, locking the door, leaving notes, acting paranoid. Management moved her then to a private room. This detail would matter later. At the time, it did not yet feel ominous. It felt more like a young woman struggling quietly, far from home. She continued to call her parents daily until January 31st. That day, Elisa was supposed to check out. She never did. Her parents, alarmed by the silence, contacted police in Los Angeles. The LAPD took the case seriously enough to issue public alerts and request help locating her. They described her as missing under suspicious circumstances. Searches followed. Officers scoured the hotel. Sniffer dogs traced her scent to a window with a fire escape, then lost it. Helicopters swept the rooftop. Nothing. Then, just days into the investigation, the city's attention was pulled away again by another crisis entirely. A former LAPD officer suddenly launched a deadly manhunt across Southern California. Resources shifted, momentum stalled. Elisa Lam remained missing. When police reviewed that elevator footage and released it, the case was changed forever. The video shows Elisa entering an elevator on the 14th floor. She presses multiple buttons. The doors remain open. She steps out, looks down the hallway, steps back in. She hides in the corner. She gestures with her hands. To many viewers, it looked like something supernatural. To others, it looked like fear. To some, it looked like a girl who was intoxicated. But there was a mundane explanation for at least one strange detail: the doors. The elevator, you need to understand, had a door hold button, which means it would keep those doors open for 2 minutes. Eliza pressed many buttons. Sometimes, reality is just boring in that way that conspiracy never is. But even with this explanation of the door hold button, the footage still disturbed people. It felt intimate, unprotected, like watching a private moment that was never supposed to be studied. And then the internet went to work. People slowed the footage and noticed missing seconds, a blurred timestamp. They asked, had someone been edited out of this? Were police hiding something? So what's important here is not whether the footage was altered. It's that the public did not trust the silence around it. That distrust would only grow. 19 days after Eliza disappeared, guests at the Cecil began complaining. The water pressure was low. The water looked dark. It tasted strange. A maintenance worker was sent to the roof to inspect the water tanks. There were several large cisterns, each holding thousands of gallons of water for the hotel. He opened one, and inside he would find possibly the shock of his life. Floating face up inside this cistern was Eliza Lam. She was naked. Her clothes were found at the bottom of the tank. Her watch and hotel keycard were with her. The decomposition was advanced. A city issued a do not drink order. Guests moved out. Headlines spread worldwide. The question was immediate and unavoidable. How did she get there? The initial autopsy could not determine a cause of death. There were no broken bones, no obvious signs of physical struggle, no illicit drugs or alcohol in her system, and toxicology later revealed something quieter and more troubling. She was prescribed multiple medications for bipolar disorder, but the levels found in her body were low, lower than expected. So investigators would later conclude she had likely been undertaking her medication, a known risk factor for psychosis in bipolar I disorder. This aligned with reports that Eliza had behaved erratically in the days before her death. She had been removed from a live TV taping in Burbank. She had told people she felt unsafe. Her own family confirmed she had experienced psychotic episodes in the past when off her medication. Police ultimately ruled her death as an accident, drowning with bipolar disorder as a contributing factor. For many, that explanation felt insufficient. For others, it felt like an erasure, because there were still details that did not sit easily. Eliza was found naked, but with men's clothing in the tank that did not belong to her. Her phone had gone missing. Her social media accounts appeared to show activity months after her death. The autopsy itself was ambiguous. One line noted swelling and blood pooling around the anal area, which some doctors believed could suggest trauma had been done to the body. Others argued the results were consistent with decomposition from being in the water tank for so long. But even experts disagreed. And once doubt enters, it tends to multiply. Online, the story transformed tremendously. Cecil Hotel's dark history, by now already with a reputation as one of the most haunted hotels in the world due to various murders and suicides that had occurred there over the years, now fused with horror tropes. Coincidences were elevated into patterns, and even a death metal musician was falsely accused and nearly driven to suicide by internet sleuths convinced they had cracked the case and incriminated him. Eliza Lam became less a person and more a puzzle, and that transformation is perhaps the most unsettling part of this story, because here's the hardest truth, the one that resists any spectacle. It is entirely possible that Eliza Lam died alone, frightened, and confused, not because someone wanted to harm her, but because her own mind betrayed her at the worst possible moment. It's also true that not every question was answered cleanly. That investigative communication had its flaws. The public was never given a full context. Both things can exist at once without contradicting each other. What we do know is this: Elisa Lam was not a cipher. She was not a ghost story. She was not an alternate reality game or ARG designed for our entertainment. She was a young woman who wrote honestly about exhaustion, loneliness, and fear, and who was still capable of humor, curiosity, and hope. Her words remain. Her life mattered before it became strange. And now the silence around her death is not an invitation to build mythology. It's a reminder of how fragile understanding can be. Because sometimes the mystery in these cases is not what happened. Sometimes it's simply why we are so desperate for something more elaborate than the truth. Because the truth in this case may well be the most uncomfortable ending of all. No villain, no grand design, no movie-like effects. Just a human being lost inside a moment that spiraled beyond recovery into a very permanent consequence. And within that, a world that's still trying to decide whether to listen or to speculate. So if this story lingers for you now that you've heard it, let it linger for the right reason. Not because it's spooky, not because it's at a supposed haunted hotel, but because it asks us, how do we treat the vulnerable? How do we tell stories respectfully about the dead? And how easily can curiosity become cruelty when answers refuse to arrive when we expect them? That is the part, to this day, of Elisa Lam's story that still hasn't closed, and maybe it never will. And maybe that's okay.